Every new business owner has one. That one employee, the one everyone warns you about, the one that everyone, including the old boss, is secretly scared of. What do you do with your difficult employee? In this video, I'm pulling back the curtain on that exact story. I'll show you how we took the most difficult employee on the team and turned her into the most valuable hidden asset. I had a client, a new owner of a marketing agency, who contacted me about his employees, particularly this one designer named Sarah. He said, "I think she's toxic. She sits and sighs in all the meetings. She questions every single one of my decisions, and she just has a bad attitude. She seems to be the main source of all negativity of the whole team." He told me his first instinct was to just get rid of her, to cut out the problem before it spreads. But he's also worried about what that would do to the team as a whole. So my answer to him was simple. Don't fire her, at least not yet. Let me talk to her first. My experience has taught me there's something crucial that most leaders miss. More often than not, the employee that everyone complains about is often the employee who cares the most. By the way, I'm Mel, and I've worked for years with new business owners and helped them unlock over $500,000 in hidden profits. In fact, I think that number has officially gone up recently to $600,000. So there we go. So anyway, before I could even speak to Sarah, this difficult problem employee, I had to get through a wall of warnings from her colleagues. In every one of my meetings with the other employees on the team, her name and her difficultness kept coming up. One person said, "Just so you know, Sarah is a lot. She has an opinion on everything, a strong opinion on everything." Another one told me, "Be ready. She's angry about the new ownership and she's been very vocal about it." Sarah herself was the last one to accept my meeting invitations. She, was just kind of avoiding it. And then even when she did accept them, she rescheduled it, I think twice, maybe even 3 times. When she finally logged onto the Zoom call, I could feel her skepticism coming through the screen. Her arms were crossed and she wasn't smiling, and her eyes were like piercing lasers into my soul. Her expression made it clear that she was thinking, "Oh, this is another colossal waste of my time." Everything about her was projecting, "I have real work to do, and this new boss is just making me do another pointless exercise just to assert his authority." The stage was set for confrontation, but I didn't use the owner's framework. I didn't do what the owner had been doing. I came in peace. I opened the call by setting the scene of a safe space. I let her know from the outset that this is not a test. This is not any kind of evaluation. There's no right or wrong answers. So basically, here's what I said to her from the very beginning. "Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for doing this. I imagine it's probably weird to have to just be doing it at your job and just be doing it, and then all of a sudden somebody you don't know is like, 'Oh, let's have a meeting,' But let me explain. The main purpose of these meetings are primarily to get your opinion on anything that you want to give me your opinion on. One of the reasons why it's private is because anything you want to be kept confidential will be kept confidential. On the other hand, if there's something you particularly want said to someone, or something you want someone to know, but you don't want to be the one who says it, these meetings can help with that too." And then, just like that, already in under 60 seconds, the most incredible thing happened. Her entire posture kind of chilled out, changed, and her arms came uncrossed, and she kind of leaned into the camera. And instead of that, mug of skepticism, it was more like curiosity. And I continued. "So I understand that there's a lot of changes happening, a lot of new things being tried. The bosses are working with you guys to develop a lot of new systems and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm here to help with the human part of that, to help whatever systems are created that make sure that they work for and in support of the people who are involved. That's the purpose of me in general. In order for me to do that helping, I first need to understand what it is that's happening, what it is that you want to do, what it is that everyone wants to do. And then I gave her a little background about me. I let her know that I primarily work with small businesses in the support aspects. And I do that in many ways. I have helped start new companies. I've gone into newer companies and helped them get established. I've helped with older companies that are restructuring things. I've helped with companies that just want some new way of doing things. I go in and I just basically find out what people want to do, what each individual wants to do, what the goals are, what's the goal of the overall company, what's the goals of personally each individual, what everybody wants. And then I seek out and I create various ways to make it all work together. And then with her consent, I started asking a series of questions in which she enthusiastically and actually relatively objectively answered freely and elaborated on. So for the next hour, even though we were only scheduled to speak for 30 minutes, she just kind of exhaled and just laid everything on the table. The questions, although they were strategic, they were mostly prompts to get her talking. They were questions like, how long have you worked here? What is your job title? What are your duties? What do they mostly consist of? What do you do? And what do you do that's outside of your duties? Is there anything that you would feel to help make your job better? Is there anything in your job that you feel you could use help with? Can you walk me through the life cycle of your last project, from the moment you received it to the moment you deliver? It didn't take much. It didn't take many questions to get her talking. She was, just going and laying out everything with surgical precision, every single point of friction in the company's workflow. She explained how a project would get dropped in the shared drive with a vague one-sentence brief from a salesperson. Now, that was a big problem. She talked about how she'd lose full days just trying to get the right assets via the Slack messages. She talked about how her being a senior designer seemed like it was a colossal waste of her time spending hours resizing a logo for social media posts because the roles of who's supposed to do that weren't clear. She described how she'd pour her expertise into a high-level design only to have a junior account manager, somebody who's just out of college, would send a Slack message with some kind of feedback that's sort of like, can you make it pop more? So it turns out that her anger wasn't just anger, right? It wasn't, anger for anger's sake. It was more like passion. It was more like the frustration that a master craftsman would feel for being forced to work with shoddy tools and in a jacked up system. So turns out all those warnings that I'd gotten from her colleagues, they weren't really about her being toxic. At least that, even if they thought it was about her being toxic, it wasn't. They were about her being the only one brave enough to speak on what everyone else might have been feeling, experiencing, or even if they didn't understand that's what it was about, they knew that there were some issues. So by the end of our call, she was like a different person. She was, sweet, she was like, thank you, since the new owner came in, you're actually the first person who's actually listened. And, that was the real diagnosis. The problem wasn't a bad employee. The problem was a brilliant employee who had been systematically ignored. So then now we have our diagnosis, the diagnosis of the difficult employee. And now that we had that, we could work on the solution. And part of the solution was pretty obvious, right? We took all the annoying complaints from Sarah and we organized them all into one place where they could be treated as professional critiques of the system. But the real solutions came when we invited Sarah in as a leader of change. We went from treating her as a problem to treating her expert critique as the foundation for a new and better system, and we empowered her to lead the charge. After setting that new reframe, we started building a tangible structure around her diagnosis. We gave her the authority to design the new project intake form that she knew the company needed. It made it easier not only for her, but it also made it easier for the salespeople to have to provide all the necessary assets and all the information up front. And that ended up solving a whole series of issues that she had been complaining about, but everybody else had been experiencing as a problem. And that she was no longer just pointing out problems now. With her creating these new actual tangible assets, she's now in charge of building solutions. And the third part of the solution, together with Sarah, we were able to define a criteria for her new role in leadership, Director of Creative. It was important that we didn't just hand her upgraded role, but we built a clear rubric and clearly defined list of responsibilities and established a clear process of how someone will achieve the position. We outlined that the Director of Creative at this agency would be responsible for creating and implementing a new quality control process, reducing revision cycles by 25% and mentoring young designers. We put her passion for quality in charge of the quality. And now when the new owner announced these changes at the staff meeting, the effect was electric. Something amazing happened. It was like you could see the relief in everyone's faces. The junior writer was thrilled that he didn't have to pretend to be a design expert anymore. And the account managers were grateful for a clear process. By listening to the most difficult employee, we had solved the problems of every employee. We didn't just fire their perceived ringleader of resistance. We made her the architect of the new, more efficient system. Sarah was no longer seen as the problem employee. She was now seen as a leader who had earned her new role by providing real, tangible solutions. And that was a great example for everybody, right? It was just as important that every other team member could now see a crystal clear, merit-based path for their own advancement. We didn't just solve Sarah's frustrations or frustrations with Sarah. We created a blueprint for career progression that made the entire team more engaged. The business impact was immediate. The project turnaround times got so much better because now that endless back and forth on the Slack was eliminated, gone. And a team that felt heavy and skeptical was suddenly energized and collaborative. So, if you've inherited a team and everyone is warning you about that one problem employee, I challenge you to see them differently. They may not be your biggest problem. They might just be your biggest, most valuable, untapped diagnostic tool. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below and let me know. When was a time that you were completely wrong about an employee, for better or for worse? Or is there a time when you were able to turn your team's friction into fuel? Love to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.